provide his time today and part of his hosting duties representing the Mother institution here. We're really pleased to be here in St. John's, and it's a beautiful day. I don't know why we're inside, so but please welcome Daniel Finn.
I was trying to figure out if I could use this to walk around, but apparently they can't record if I use this to walk around, so I'm not going to use this.
You can. You're fine.
So if I use this, you can still record?
Absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah.
We're going to do questions, and I'll get it to you.
All right.
Well, thank you. Good morning. For about the last 30 years, I have every January, almost every January, gone to the National Economics meetings. And the next weekend, almost every year, are the National Christian Ethics meetings. And as you may guess, these are two very different worlds. And I've often felt schizoid as I move from one to the other. Because arguments that work in one don't work in the other. The kind of sources for authority that work in one don't work in the other. Since a good deal of my writing has come out of that conflict, trying to say, okay, these are smart people in both groups, but who don't talk to each other, and often don't even understand each other if they do try. Isn't there some way that we could get together on these things and sort of try to bring together the insights of diverse points of view? So much of what I've done in my own scholarly work is an attempt to bridge that gap, which of course means that unlike the culture of the Chesterton Society, I am not one who tries to offend people in order to make their presentation.
I love him.
Only because it seems to me there's a little bit too much of that already going on in the world, and that's part of the problem. Now, even worse than the difference in the two disciplines is within each group, in my experience, there are great differences, so great that people don't talk to each other. So at the National Economic meetings, there must be 45 or 50 different sub-organizations that meet, including everything from the most sort of right-wing organization you can think of to Marxist economists, the Union of Radical Political Economy, and so forth. And so even within economics, there are these groups who don't go to each other's sessions, don't read each other's books, don't respect each other's points of view, and if you ask them what they think of the other folks, they've sold out in one way or another. They've nothing worth listening to. Unfortunately, to some degree, that happens in the Society of Christian Ethics too. I think it's less severe, but there's some of that. So between the liberationists on the left and sort of the neoconservative market types on the right, I'm talking here of the economic questions in the ethics field. And so I find myself knowing people on both sides of these divides, thinking, gosh, they've got some really good insights here, and there's some really good insights here. Why can't these people get together and talk to each other? So what I'd like to propose today is two frameworks that may help us make those kind of connections. And I don't know if that's going to be helpful to the Chesterton effort on economic life or not, but you folks can decide. One further little vignette before I start, and this may be the one time I'm going to get to really insult somebody here, and that is, during Bob's talk this morning, I couldn't help but think of another experience I had last spring. I was asked to give a talk at a conference on the East Coast where scholars were talking about Bernard Lonergan, very famous 20th century Jesuit theologian, a Canadian, and his work on economics. Back in the 30s, he wrote an essay and a model on economic life, and he tweaked it later on in his life. And here were a bunch of people, about this size group, mostly philosophers and theologians, who came together to talk about Bernard Lonergan's economics. But I had the feeling there that, gosh, it would have been a lot better if they had invited some economists, because a lot of things that were said about economics, I felt, gosh, you know, there are some distinctions economists make, and so it's not quite as bad as it looks like. And that was part of the thing, one of the reactions I had with Bob, and he and I will get a chance to talk that out sometime today. But what I'd like to propose is that in order to make any progress politically on these issues in any nation, I'll take the U.S. for a good example, it seems to me we're going to have more than just our small group, whatever that might be, pushing for this, right? We're going to have to get a larger coalition, and that means understanding over coalition lines into other groups. And thus, I'd like to propose these two frameworks. And the first one has to do with 4 problems that every economy has to solve. And I think it helps us orient our thinking, and frankly, when we're talking to folks who disagree with us, it may help them orient their thinking, because they shouldn't lose track of any of these 4 problems. And then the second framework I'm going to talk about has to do with the debate that people have over whether markets are just or unjust, right? You can think about this as a debate about capitalism, but I don't use the word capitalism anymore, unless I'm really forced to, because one of my convictions about communication is that what you try to do when you communicate is you have an idea in your head that you put into a word that goes into the other person's ear and hopefully creates in their head the same idea you had in your head, right? And that's good communication. And the problem with capitalism is it creates ideas in heads that are very different. As soon as you say the word, people see it very differently. And so I try not to use the word. It's kind of dysfunctional. I think socialism is the same kind of way. Some words sort of lose their usefulness. So anyway, I'd rather talk about markets. So the second framework will be looking at various debates about whether markets are just or unjust or in what ways. And I'm going to raise 4 issues there. So basically, I have just 8 things to say this morning. And you can see whether you find them helpful or not. 2 different frameworks. See what you think. Okay, the problems that every economy has to face. Economists have always had a list of these problems, but they fall into 2 groups, and they're really, I would call, the first 2 problems of the 4 problems that I'm going to arrogantly assert every economy has to solve. The first is what economists call allocation. It's the production of goods and services, taking productive resources, people's labor, natural resources, various kinds of other resources, and putting them together to produce stuff, goods and services in the economy. And having to decide in each case how you're going to produce them. Because, of course, you could use more labor or less capital, less labor, and lots of things you can mix around, energy and so forth. So allocation, in a sense, gets the production done of goods and services. The second, and economists agree on this, is distribution. Every system has to have a way to decide who gets what of all the things produced. So markets have answers to these first 2 questions. And markets do a much better job on the first question than the second, but not a perfect job. What gets produced and how? Well, one of the problems, of course, is that markets may end up producing things that we don't think should be bought and sold on markets. Every country has a certain list of prohibited behaviors. Nobody I can think of is recommending that we should have Walmart stock shoulder-held, surface-to-air missiles. We can't think of any good use for it, and there's a whole bunch of things that we think ought not be sold on the market, and so there are laws against it. And we have debates about which ones should be prohibited and so forth. So markets produce too much of some stuff and too little of other stuff, right? Whether it's national defense or homes for the homeless, markets don't produce a lot of things that do need to get produced, the court system and lots. So we have to adjust that. And similarly, with distribution, markets do have a way of distributing everything, and the answer, as we all know, is you get what others are willing to give you for whatever you have to sell. Right? And in most of the cases, most of us are labor, right? Somebody may own a woodlot and can sell their trees and so forth. Somebody has other things they inherited from their parents, financial wealth of kinds. But the basic market answer is you get what others are willing to give you based on what you're going to sell them. All right? And most of us, nearly everybody,